This is GARIS, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 212, entitled Men's Sexbot / Artwomb Revenge on Women. Description. This flyer talks about the sweetness of the revenge men will feel against the gender crimes committed by women against men when the sexbots and artwombs come, allowing men to ignore women, preferring to grow their own kids and to sex their bots, which will do a better job of satisfying men than women can. Women will then go into deep existential shock and depression as men ignore women in droves. Now the flyer itself, do full screen, center. Men's sexbot / artwomb revenge on women. Life-size sexbots are starting to appear on the market now. As AI, that's artificial intelligence, keeps making progress, these sexbots, sex robots, will become increasingly interesting for men to chat with, and will be given artificial personalities that men like. That is, they will not nag, nor be irrational, emotional, hysterical, which are qualities in women that men despise and certainly do not want reproduced in the sexbots that they spend their money on. Japanese scientists have already grown a goat successfully in an artwomb, that's artificial womb, so human babies can't be far off. Once these two technological revolutions happen, women will go into deep existential shock and depression as men ignore them, preferring to grow their own kids, to sex their bots, and not have to put up with the very negative qualities that women have that men prefer to avoid. Once women lose their two traditional monopolies, that is, their vaginas and their wombs, feminism will disappear overnight, and women will be competing desperately amongst themselves for dwindling male attention. Women will be forced to be very nice to men, otherwise they'll be ignored. Men won't need women anymore because male engineering genius has given them what they want in women, namely women's baby factory capability and women's penis receptacles. In the past, men had to tolerate women because only women could create the next generation, and only women had vaginas, so men just had to put up with female nagging, female irrationality, female emotionality, and worse, female hysterics when women have their PMS, premenstrual syndrome, and menopausal craziness. There's a well-known saying by men about women that you can't live with them and you can't live without them, meaning that women are such pains in the butt that they are impossible to tolerate for long, and yet when men have to have them to get the sex they want, that until now only women could provide. But all that is now about to change. With sexbots and artwombs coming soon, men will be able to get their revenge against women for the abusive treatment of men committed by the hated feminazis in the divorce courts, the lack of a paternity rejection rate, the brainwashing of boys in the schools and the media, etc., telling them that the male sex is inferior, whereas in reality just the reverse is true, as is shown clearly by science. MGTOWs and masculists now have such a hatred of the feminazis, the fluffy feminist hypocrites, that when the sexbots and artwombs come, men's revenge against women will feel very sweet. Men are now so abused in the divorce courts, and on a massive scale, with one married father in 4 being financially massacred at the hands of a fluffy feminist hypocrite-dominated divorce court system, which sees men as subhuman cash machines, whose sole purpose on this earth is to pay for women to have babies, so that divorcing fathers have their kids ripped away from them with a 90% probability. They lose half of their possessions and their house to the fluffy ex-wife so she can raise her kids in it and be paid child support from him. For kids he will barely see, maybe 2 afternoons a month. And if the ex-wife is a real fluffy, he may have to pay her alimony so that she can remain a parasite off him for the rest of her life. Not surprisingly, millions of divorce massacred men have learned a hatred of these fluffy parasites and a hatred of the feminazi divorce court judges and lawyers, and especially for the gender politicians who created these deeply misandrous gender laws in the first place. So how will men, that is masculists and MGTOWs, take their revenge in practice? How will they be able to wipe out feminism overnight once the artwombs and sexbots are with us, probably well within the lifetimes of most of my readers? Probably the feminazis and fluffy feminists will push hard to have these two things banned. They will pull out all their stops to lobby the gender politicians to give them the new banning laws that the feminazis want. But we're talking about sex, one of the strongest drives that men have. Once men have had a taste of what a good quality sexbot can do, they'll be hooked and will push very hard to have the sexbots and artwombs put on the market. The male pressure will be so strong that it'll be unstoppable. These sexbots will have luscious curves, film star faces, creamy, grippy vaginas that women will not be able to compete with. When the feminazis and fluffies push hard to have them banned, men will push back hard and hurl masculist venom at these hypocritical bitches. Of course, the main reason why these feminazi bitches and these fluffy feminist hypocrites will fight so hard to have these artwombs and sexbots banned is that if they are allowed, then women will no longer be able to parasite off men's money by bribing men with sex and babies. If men pay for women to sit on their fat parasitic asses in a house that he pays for. The appearance of the artwombs and the sexbots will force women to become FIPs, financially independent persons, forcing them to grow up, to take on adult financial responsibilities by pulling their financial weight, by bothering to get a career-competent education at high school and college, so that they can be FIPs as adults and not parasite off a man's money the way fluffies expect to. Men's revenge by ignoring women, preferring to sex their bots and growing their own kids, will force women to FIP up, to grow up, to take responsibility for their own lives and not be a child woman depending on a man, a prospect that scares a lot of women shitless. It'll be nice for men to have the divorce courts men-feared and the para brought in, so that men have the same rights as women, that is, the equal right to reject an unwanted pregnancy. Women don't love men, that is, the red pill message of the MGTOW, but rather men's financial exploitability. When a man loses his exploitability, his woman will coldly, disloyally drop him in search of a more exploitable male. This trait in females evolved over several million years, and it makes good Darwinian sense. But for masculists, being treated as a cash machine and being judged solely as a source of resources for women makes them bitter. The masculists have a saying, "I'm more than a cash machine, you bitch." Men bitterly resent being judged almost exclusively on their ability to serve as cash machines to fluffy feminist women, having their other qualities, their intelligence, their dynamism, their creativity, their honesty, etc., ignored as of secondary importance. Men really resent this, so when the time comes for revenge, it will be sweet for men. All men should know about the neuroscience phenomenon of male frontal lobe switch off. That is, the frontal lobes of the male brain switch off when he sees his regular female sex partner. His frontal lobes are used for long-term planning and critical thinking. It's telling that nature, that evolution, has found it necessary to switch off a man's critical thinking when he sees his female sexual partner. Presumably, nature evolved this trick to keep men intellectually uncritical, so that his female sexual partner could more easily manipulate him, so that he would be more likely to give her his resources, so that she could parasite upon him and get food for herself and her babies. But now when men have woken up to this phenomenon, thanks to neuroscience knowledge, so a man needs to make his rational decisions away from the presence of his regular female sexual partner. If he tries to think rationally in her presence, he won't be able to. His frontal lobes will be switched off, which is where the well-known saying came from, quote, A man can tolerate a lot in a woman if the sex is good, which is equivalent to saying that if the man has his frontal lobes regularly switched off, he will be less critical of his female sexual partner's manipulation, nagging, sexploitation, etc. Men are now also learning that women have about 10 billion fewer neurons in their brains, because women's average brain volume is about 10% smaller than the average man's. This 10% less neural processing capacity implies that women are less capable than men at performing tasks that men excel in. Women invent almost nothing, build nothing, create nothing. The female contribution to world intellect is a few percent at best. Men have intellectually entertained women in the past in an effort to persuade women to let men get into their cunts. But with the sexbots giving men better sex than women can, women will have to invest a lot more in their minds and stop being passive, intellectually insipid. That bores men, especially sage, that is, intellectual men. It will take some decades before AI reaches human-level conversational ability, so women will still have the edge on machines for those remaining decades, but only if they bother to get off their intellectually lazy, parasitic mental asses and become a lot more intellectually stimulating by having original opinions. But that has never been women's strong point, so many men, especially the really smart men, the sages, will just ignore women once the sexbots come. Such men will see women as intellectually inferior and ignorable. Women have been parasites on men for several million years. They evolved that way because they depended on men to give them meat from the male hunt. Women evolved to be prostitutes to men, to be better able to bribe men with female sex, to give women and their babies scarce male-hunted meat. Women lost their days of sexual heat that dogs and monkeys still have, and evolved to be in heat every day of the month, to be better able to bribe men to give women meat. All this makes sense from a prehistorical point of view, but becomes merely a burden to men in the modern age. Men invented the contraceptive pill, so women now choose to have few kids. So now have a career window of some 40 plus years, so now can work. The masculists push women morally to work, otherwise women remain the hated fluffy parasites that the masculists despise and punish them by ignoring them to death, so that fluffies rot on the shelf to extinction. With the rise of the sexbots in artwombs, men will soon have the tools to force women to fip up, to get off their parasitic asses and grow up, become adults, taking on responsibility for their own lives, and stop judging men by men's sexploitability quotient, SQ. Masculists and MGTOWs feel considerable bitterness and hatred towards the fluffies and fluffy feminist hypocrites and the enormous damage and injustice they have committed against men, particularly in the divorce courts. So it's to be expected that men will turn to their sexbots and artwombs partly out of a spirit of revenge, to hurt women for women's gender crimes against men. It will be sweet for men, watching feminism disappear fast as women wake up to the fact that men are ignoring them in droves. Men won't have to put up with women's inferiorities. Men don't respect women. Women have child brains and behave like children. Women have contributed almost nothing to world culture. Women have largely been merely tolerated by men because of women's baby factory and child raiser roles. But with these two technological revolutions about to come, men will have the means to ignore women. Men will not have to put up with women's negative traits, forcing women to behave very nicely to men, competing with many other women for men's dwindling attention. A decade or so from now, the gender landscape will be very different. Feminism, feminazis, fluffy feminist hypocrites, etc. will have become museum pieces. They'll be stuffed and put behind glass. A gender revolution is at hand, and this time it will be men's turn to get their revenge, their sweet revenge. Let the good times roll. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de GARIS. Prof. Hugo de GARIS at yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channels de GARIS Masculist MGTOW Flyers and de GARIS Essays.